The police lights flashing in my driveway weren't for a crime. They were for a lie, and the woman who told it had no idea who she'd just called. I didn't move into the neighborhood to make friends. I moved in to disappear. After years of working cases that attracted the wrong kind of attention, I'd learned the value of blending in. No flashy cars. No recognizable patterns. No explanations to people who liked asking questions they weren't entitled to answers for. The house was perfect for that. Beige siding. Neutral landscaping. Nothing memorable. The kind of place delivery drivers forget 5 minutes after they leave. The driveway was long, straight, and unremarkable, except for one thing. It was mine, not shared, not communal, not subject to interpretation. It had been surveyed, recorded, and filed with the county decades before the HOA ever existed. The legal description was crystal clear, which is why, for the first 3 weeks, nothing happened. I parked my truck there every day. Same spot, same angle, no complaints, no notes, no passive-aggressive looks. Then Karen noticed. I didn't know her name at first, only her posture, rigid, upright, chin slightly lifted like she was constantly preparing to correct someone. She stood on the sidewalk one afternoon as I stepped out of my truck, clipboard pressed against her chest like a badge. "Excuse me," she said, smiling without warmth. "You can't park there." I looked behind me, then back at her. "Yes, I can." Her smile tightened. "No," she said slowly, like she was speaking to a child. "That driveway is restricted." I asked restricted by whom. She tapped the clipboard. The HOA. That was my first mistake, not correcting her immediately. Instead, I thanked her for the information and went inside. From her perspective, that probably felt like victory. For mine, it was data collection. 2 days later, there was a notice taped to my door. Not mailed, not officially served, just taped, crooked, like it had been slapped up in a hurry. HOA parking violation warning. It cited no statute, no county ordinance, just vague language about community standards and emergency access. I peeled it off, folded it once, and set it on the counter. The next notice came 3 days later. This one threatened fines. The third threatened towing. Each one referenced a rule that didn't exist. That's when I knew this wasn't about the driveway. It was about control. Karen didn't like variables. She didn't like things she couldn't dominate with form, a rule, or a raised voice. And I had unknowingly become a problem she needed to solve. The first real confrontation happened on a Saturday morning. I was unloading groceries when she approached with 2 other board members trailing behind her like interns. She didn't introduce them. Didn't need to. They were there to witness compliance. "You've been warned multiple times," she said. "If you continue parking there, we'll escalate." I asked her to show me the rule. She flipped pages dramatically, then paused. "Well, it's understood," she said. That was when I corrected her. Calmly, quietly, clearly. I told her the driveway was privately owned, recorded in county property records, and not subject to HOA parking rules. I even offered to email her the survey. Her face changed. Not anger. Something worse. Embarrassment. People like Karen don't forgive embarrassment. They avenge it. She leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "We'll see what the police say." I nodded. "That's fine." She mistook that for fear. The next week was textbook escalation. Orange cones appeared one afternoon while I was at work. When I got home, they blocked the entrance to my driveway entirely, zip-tied together, waited at the base. Someone had put thought into it. Karen stood nearby, phone in hand. "I already called," she said loudly, making sure a neighbor watering their lawn could hear. "You're obstructing a fire lane." I looked at the cones, then at her, then at the curb. No red paint, no signage, no municipal markings of any kind. "Move your vehicle," she ordered, "or you'll be cited." I asked her one last time to show me authority. She smiled. "You'll see it soon." She turned away and spoke into her phone. "Yes, I'd like to report an illegally parked vehicle obstructing emergency access. The homeowner is refusing to comply." She emphasized the last part. Refusing. That word is like gasoline to emergency dispatch. Within minutes, I could hear sirens. Neighbors stepped outside. Phones came out. Curtains moved. Karen stood taller with every passing second. This was her moment. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly realize, was that she had just crossed from HOA theatrics into something much more serious. And once police lights enter a situation based on a lie, the outcome stops being predictable. As the first patrol car turned into the street, Karen folded her arms and smiled. She thought she was about to win. She had no idea this was only the beginning. The first patrol car rolled in slow, tires crunching lightly against the gravel at the edge of my driveway. No sirens, no rush, just lights, red and blue washing over beige houses and manicured lawns like something dangerous had happened in a place where danger didn't belong. Karen loved that part. She stood near the cones, arms crossed, chin lifted, already rehearsing a version of events she'd tell later. You could see it in her posture, the satisfaction of being right before anyone had confirmed it. The officer stepped out, adjusted his vest, and glanced around. His eyes went from the cones to my truck, to Karen, and finally to me. "Who called it in?" he asked. Karen didn't hesitate. "I did." She launched immediately into her speech, barely letting him finish writing her name down. "This man is illegally parked," she said, pointing at my truck like it was contraband. "That driveway is restricted for emergency access. He's been warned multiple times and refuses to move." The officer listened, didn't interrupt, just nodded slowly, the way experienced cops do when they're letting someone talk themselves into clarity. "Is this a marked fire lane?" he asked. Karen gestured vaguely. "It doesn't have to be marked. It's HOA designated." The officer looked at the curb again. "No paint, no signage. HOA designations don't create fire lanes," he said neutrally. Karen frowned. "They do here." That was lie number one. He turned to me. "Sir, is this your property?" "Yes." "Do you have documentation?" "I can pull the county survey right now." Karen scoffed loudly. "We don't need that. The HOA has authority." The officer paused his notepad mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "HOAs don't override county property records." That was the first crack. Karen didn't back down. She doubled down. "This is obstruction," she said. "If an ambulance needed access." The officer raised a hand gently. "Has there been an emergency?" "No, but..." "So this is a hypothetical?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. The officer sighed and radioed in. "I'm going to need a supervisor." Karen smiled. She heard backup. She didn't hear verification. While they waited, a second patrol car arrived, then a third, not because the situation was volatile, but because the call had been logged as refusal to comply with emergency access. Dispatch protocols don't care if the call is nonsense. They care about liability. Karen watched the cars line up like trophies. Neighbors gathered closer now. The show was getting good. She leaned toward me and whispered, "You should have just moved." I didn't respond. The supervising sergeant arrived 10 minutes later. Older, calm, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He walked the scene silently. Checked the cones. Checked the curb. Checked the driveway boundaries. Then he asked Karen the same question again. "Is this a marked fire lane?" "Yes," she said. "By whom?" "The HOA." He nodded once. "Do you have documentation authorizing the HOA to designate emergency lanes?" She handed him a laminated packet. He flipped through it. Rules about lawn height, trash bins, exterior paint colors. Nothing about fire lanes. He closed the packet slowly. "Ma'am," he said, "this doesn't support your claim." Karen's smile twitched. "He's still illegally parked," she insisted. "Even if it's not a fire lane, it violates community rules." The sergeant turned to me. "Have you received written notice?" "Yes." "Did they cite a municipal code?" "No." He nodded again. Then he did something that made Karen's face stiffen. He stepped aside and made a call. Not to towing, not to code enforcement. Up the chain. I recognized the shift immediately. This wasn't routine anymore. Karen, meanwhile, mistook silence for victory. "Good," she said loudly. Let's get the sheriff down here. This has gone on long enough. The sergeant looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "We already are." The word sheriff landed like a drop plate. Karen straightened her jacket, smoothed her hair, practiced composure. This was still, in her mind, a performance she controlled. What she didn't realize was that the call she'd made, the way she'd framed it, had triggered internal scrutiny. False reports involving emergency access get attention, not because they're dramatic, but because they're dangerous. The sheriff's vehicle arrived without urgency. No lights, no siren, just presence. He parked off to the side and stepped out, hat tucked under his arm. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. Subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders squared. His pace slowed. His eyes sharpened. He gave me a single nod. Not friendly. Professional. Karen noticed immediately. She stepped forward, eager to reclaim momentum. "Sheriff," she said brightly, "thank you for coming. This man is obstructing emergency access and refusing HOA compliance." The sheriff didn't answer her. He looked at the sergeant instead. "What do we have?" The sergeant summarized calmly. No editorializing. Just facts. When he finished, the sheriff looked back at me. "Sir," he said, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Karen laughed nervously. "I already explained everything." The sheriff ignored her completely. We stepped aside. Quietly, he asked, "Do you want this handled formally, or do you want to escalate it?" I glanced back at Karen. She was watching us closely now, suspicion creeping in where confidence used to live. Formally, I said. He nodded once. Understood. He turned back to the group. Karen stepped forward again. "So you're going to ticket him now?" The sheriff looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. "No," he said. Her mouth fell open. "I'm going to document you." The street went silent. Even the neighbors stopped whispering. Karen blinked rapidly. "Excuse me?" "You made a claim of emergency obstruction," he said evenly. "You represented authority you don't have. And you used 911 resources to enforce private HOA rules. I was just—" "That's a false report," he continued. "At minimum." Her face drained of color. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You can't be serious." The sheriff's tone didn't change. "I'm very serious." She turned to the sergeant. "You're just going to let him talk to me like this?" The sergeant didn't respond. He didn't have to. Karen finally looked at me again, not with anger, with confusion. "Who are you?" she asked. I didn't answer. The sheriff did. "Ma'am," he said, "this situation is no longer about a driveway." And that was the moment Karen realized she hadn't just lost control. She had invited oversight. The silence after the sheriff's words was heavier than the sirens that had brought him there. Karen stood frozen, eyes darting between the uniformed officers, the neighbors, and me. Her mouth open as if to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time since she decided my driveway offended her sense of order, she didn't know which rule to reach for. The sheriff broke the silence by doing something Karen didn't expect. He asked me a question. "Do you want me to proceed here?" he said calmly. "Or do you want this documented and addressed at the county level tomorrow?" The phrasing mattered. It wasn't if he would act. It was how far. Karen heard it too. Her head snapped toward him. "Tomorrow," she repeated. "What does that mean?" The sheriff didn't answer her. I met his eyes. "Here is fine." He nodded once. Decision made. Karen stepped forward again, panic creeping into her voice. "You can't just take his side without—" "This isn't about sides," the sheriff interrupted. "This is about authority." That word hit her harder than anything else. Authority was supposed to belong to her. The sheriff gestured toward the cones. "Who placed these?" "I did," Karen said defensively, "as part of my HOA duties." "Under whose authorization?" "The board's." "Do you have written approval?" "Well, no, but—" "Then remove them." Karen hesitated. It was a small moment, but revealing. She was used to issuing orders, not receiving them. Her eyes flicked toward the neighbors, then back to the sheriff. "I don't think I should," she said. "This is still under dispute." The sheriff's expression didn't change. Ma'am, he said evenly, I'm not disputing it. He turned to the sergeant. Document refusal. The sergeant wrote it down. Karen's confidence cracked. Why are you doing this? She demanded, now fully addressing the sheriff. He's just a homeowner. The sheriff looked at me briefly, then back at her. Ma'am, he said, you don't get to decide who is just anything. She laughed sharply. So what, he's your friend? The sheriff's jaw tightened. No, he said. He's not. He paused. He's my superior. The street seemed to inhale collectively. Karen blinked. Once. Twice. That's not funny, she said. The sheriff didn't smile. This isn't humor. Her eyes widened. You're saying what? That he works for the county. I'm saying, the sheriff replied carefully, that I report to him operationally. Karen shook her head in disbelief. That's impossible. He lives here. Yes, the sheriff said. He does. She turned to me again, her voice dropping. You lied to us. I never told you anything. I said calmly. That's deceptive. No, I replied. That's private. The sheriff continued without emotion. This is what's going to happen. We're documenting a false report. We're documenting unauthorized obstruction. And we're forwarding this incident to county council. Karen's breath quickened. For what? Abuse of emergency services, he said. An impersonation of authority. One of the HOA board members finally spoke up. Wait, he said nervously. This is getting blown out of proportion. The sheriff looked at him. It usually does when someone calls 911 to win an argument. Karen backed away half a step. This is retaliation, she said. You can't intimidate me because I volunteer for the HOA. The sheriff met her gaze steadily. You weren't intimidated. You were corrected. He turned to me. Would you like to add anything? I considered it. This was the moment Karen expected a speech. A reveal. Some triumphant declaration of power. She didn't get one. I'd like the cones removed, I said. And I like no further contact except through counsel. The sheriff nodded. Granted. He motioned to an officer. Help remove them. Karen stared at the cones like they were suddenly radioactive. I'm not touching them, she snapped. The officer stepped forward anyway. As the cones were removed, Karen's authority physically vanished piece by piece. Neighbors watched silently. Phones recorded. And Karen stood there, hands trembling, realizing that everyone she tried to impress had just watched her lose. When the cones were gone, the sheriff turned back to me. There's something else, he said quietly. I knew it was coming. Her reports aren't isolated, he continued. Dispatch flagged her name. This isn't the first time. Karen's head snapped up. That's a lie. The sheriff didn't look at her. Multiple calls. Similar pattern. Exaggerated claims. The HOA board member paled. I exhaled slowly. So this isn't about a driveway. I said. No, the sheriff replied. It hasn't been for a while. Karen's voice broke. I was just enforcing rules. You were enforcing power, the sheriff corrected. There's a difference. He turned to the sergeant. I want a full report. Then he looked at Karen one last time. You summoned me, he said, and now I'm here. She swallowed hard. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. It was a record, and records have consequences. Karen laughed nervously and said, Okay, but why does the sheriff keep asking you what to do? No one answered her, because the truth was about to expose more than a driveway. It was about to expose how long the HOA had been getting away with it. Karen's question hung in the air longer than she intended. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't defiant. It was scared. The sheriff didn't answer immediately. Neither did I. That silence wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. In situations like this, every word matters. Once identities are clarified, nothing goes back to casual. Let's slow this down, the sheriff said at last, his voice firm but controlled. This is no longer an on-scene resolution. Karen crossed her arms, trying to rebuild her composure. Fine, then let's handle it properly. We are, he replied. He turned to the sergeant. I want dispatch logs pulled for every call from this address and this HOA over the past 18 months. The sergeant's eyebrows lifted slightly. Yes, sir. Karen's face tightened. Why? Because the sheriff said patterns matter. She laughed weakly. This is absurd. You're acting like I committed a crime. The sheriff didn't raise his voice. You may have... That word, may, landed heavier than an accusation. It meant review. It meant scrutiny. It meant things Karen had never faced before. She pointed at me. So, what? He's some kind of internal affairs. No, the sheriff said. He's not. I stepped forward then, not to assert dominance, but to end speculation. I work in oversight, I said calmly. Joint operations. Compliance. Risk exposure. Karen blinked. Oversight of what? County agencies, I replied, including law enforcement partnerships. Her mouth opened, closed. That doesn't make sense, she said. You live here? Yes, I said again. I do. The sheriff continued. He doesn't supervise me day to day. But when multi-agency issues arise, misuse of authority, liability exposure, false reporting, he has jurisdiction. Karen shook her head. This is a setup? No, the sheriff said. This is documentation. He gestured toward his vehicle. I'm opening an incident report. One of the HOA board members finally lost his nerve. Hold on, he said. This was just a misunderstanding. The sheriff looked at him. Misunderstandings don't involve false emergency claims. The board member swallowed. She didn't mean it like that. Karen snapped. Don't talk for me. The sheriff raised a hand. Ma'am, stop. That single word, stop, carried more authority than every HOA citation she'd ever issued. He turned to me. Do you want county counsel looped in now, or after preliminary review? Karen's eyes widened. Lawyers? For parking. I answered evenly. Now. The sheriff nodded. Done. Karen's voice rose. This is harassment. No, the sheriff corrected. This is due process. He stepped aside to make the call. While he spoke quietly into his phone, Karen paced, muttering under her breath. Neighbors were no longer filming. They were watching, transfixed. This had gone far beyond gossip. This was something official unfolding in real time. She stopped in front of me. You could have just told us who you were. I met her gaze. You never asked who I was. You told me what I could do. She scoffed. People like you hide behind titles. No, I said, people like me don't need them. The sheriff returned. County counsel is aware, he said. They want all HOA correspondence related to this address. Karen stiffened. You don't have the right. Yes, he said, we do. One of the officers approached Karen. Ma'am, do you have copies of the notices you issued? She hesitated. I might. We'll need them, he said. She looked around, searching for support. There was none. The sheriff addressed the group. For clarity, this homeowner has not violated any municipal code. The driveway is private property. The cones were unauthorized, and the 911 call was unfounded. Karen whispered, This is unreal. The sheriff continued. At this point, continued interference could constitute harassment. The word hit her like a slap. Harassment was something she accused others of, never something applied to her. So what happens now? She asked quietly. The sheriff answered honestly. Now it becomes a paper trail. He looked at me, and that paper trail doesn't stop at the HOA. Karen's knees visibly weakened. You're ruining my life over a driveway, she said. I shook my head. You escalated this. I just didn't stop you. Silence again. Finally, the sheriff spoke. Ma'am, he said, you called me here to enforce rules you don't have the power to make. He paused. And now I'm enforcing ones you can't ignore. Karen looked around one last time. At the neighbors, the officers, the board members who wouldn't meet her eyes. Her authority was gone. Not taken. Exposed. The moment Karen realized the sheriff answered to me, everything shifted. Her confidence, once ironclad, evaporated like morning fog over the driveway. She stood there, fuming, trying to reconstruct a sense of authority. But the neighborhood, the very audience she had curated for years, was watching her unravel. I leaned against the truck, quietly, arms crossed, letting the moment breathe. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about exposure, about showing what happens when someone abuses small power for personal satisfaction. And Karen had stacked that power like building blocks, each one resting on intimidation and fear. Her kingdom, her HOA authority, wasn't just challenged. It was crumbling. The sheriff spoke calmly, his tone deliberate, cutting through her panic. "Ma'am," he said, "the cones were unauthorized. The citations you issued were not legally binding. The 911 call constitutes a false report, and these actions are now documented." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. "Documented," he repeated, glancing at the sergeant who had been quietly noting every violation, every claim, every false statement. The sergeant nodded. "All filed." Karen's eyes darted to the neighbors. Some were recording on their phones, others whispering in disbelief. She was suddenly very aware of an audience she hadn't considered in her self-righteous crusade. One of the HOA board members finally spoke, voice shaking. "Karen, maybe we overreacted." Overreacted? That didn't even begin to cover it. The sheriff, sensing the fracture, continued. "This isn't just about a driveway. This is about a pattern. Misuse of authority, false claims, and selective enforcement. We're forwarding all documentation to county council." Karen's face turned pale. What does that mean?" she stammered. "It means your actions are under formal review," the sheriff replied. "Not just your calls, not just your letters, not just your cones. All of it. The HOA itself will be scrutinized." Karen's mind raced. She had spent years enforcing arbitrary rules, confident that no one above her would notice, confident that her small fiefdom was untouchable. Now the sheriff, and by extension me, had shown her how fragile that illusion was. "Your rules don't carry the weight you think they do," I said quietly, letting the words sink in. She whirled toward me. "You can't do this. This is my home, my neighborhood, my authority." "No," I corrected her. "This is your overreach. You were granted authority for the community's benefit, not for personal power trips." Her hands trembled slightly. She tried to square her shoulders, attempted to project confidence, but it was gone. The threat wasn't me. It was a reality that everyone could see. She had been caught, and there was no one left to defend her. The neighbors began whispering among themselves. Some were nodding in relief, some incredulous that one person could hold so much sway over them without oversight. Karen glared at them. You'll see. You don't know what's coming." "You mean the investigation?" I asked calmly. "It's already coming." By the time the cones were removed, physically by the officer, the symbolism was clear. Karen had attempted to create a barrier of power. It failed. Every misstep, every unauthorized action, every inflated complaint had been documented. The sheriff stepped closer, speaking softly but firmly so Karen could hear. "Any further interference, harassment, or false claims will escalate consequences. This is not a warning. This is a record." Karen swallowed. Her lips trembled. She had built her authority on intimidation, and now she was powerless before both the law and the community she thought she commanded. The HOA board members avoided her gaze. Their complicity was recorded, and they knew it. Some had warned her in private, but they had stayed silent. That silence was now part of the record. Karen finally muttered, I just wanted to enforce the rules." The sheriff's eyes didn't leave hers. "You wanted control. There's a difference. Authority isn't personal. It's procedural. You misused it." I took a deep breath, surveying the scene. My driveway remained exactly where it had always been. My property was intact. My truck hadn't moved. And yet, the battle was already won. Karen's aura of invincibility had collapsed. The sergeant added, quietly but pointedly, "Ma'am, expect county council to follow up and prepare to provide all documentation of HOA activities for review. This includes emails, letters, meeting minutes, and any records related to citations or complaints." Karen's face paled further. "All of that? Yes, said Sheriff. It's all relevant. Karen staggered back a step. The crowd murmured. The neighbors' smartphones captured every expression: panic, disbelief, embarrassment. The facade she had relied on for years was gone, leaving only exposure and accountability. Finally, Karen turned toward me, her voice cracking. You set me up. I shook my head slowly. I didn't set anything up. You created the situation yourself. All I did was let reality catch up to you. The sheriff gave a final nod to the sergeant. Documented. Completed. Notify county council. This matter is escalated. Karen's knees nearly gave way. She tried to speak, to argue, to deflect blame, but there was nothing left. Her HOA-issued authority was meaningless in the face of real law, real hierarchy, and documented abuse. Neighbors started dispersing, whispering among themselves. The sheriff returned to his vehicle. The sergeant followed, still taking notes. Karen was left standing alone in the driveway she had tried to claim as her own. No cones, no authority, no audience except the silent witnesses she had alienated with her obsession for control. I leaned against my truck and finally spoke softly. Your power doesn't extend beyond the law, and pretending it does only get you caught. Karen's lips quivered. She didn't respond. She knew it, and now she had nowhere to hide. By sunset, the scene was quiet again. My driveway was mine. The cones were gone. The neighborhood had seen the collapse of someone who thought rules were tools of personal control rather than communal guidance. Karen had tried to weaponize authority. She had failed spectacularly. And this was only the beginning of the record that would follow her for months to come. Karen stood in the driveway, the evening sun casting long shadows over the asphalt, her orange cones gone, the street emptying of neighbors who had watched the drama unfold. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Her composure, once so assured and sharp, had vanished entirely. For the first time in years, she realized she wasn't in control. She tried to speak. This isn't fair. I was just enforcing rules? I finished for her, my voice calm but firm. You weren't enforcing rules. You were enforcing control. That's a very different thing. Her eyes darted to the sheriff, who stood silently by his vehicle, observing. Even now, she couldn't believe the scene. The very authority she had summoned to intimidate me was standing there, acknowledging my authority above hers. The sergeant stepped forward, holding a folder of documentation. Ma'am, everything has been logged. County council has been notified. They will be reviewing all HOA records, past complaints, and actions taken at this address. Karen's face paled. Oh, all of it? Yes, the sheriff said. Every call you've made, every citation you've issued, every threat of towing, it's all part of the record now. Misuse of emergency services and abuse of authority are serious matters. Her knees wobbled. But I was just doing my job. The sheriff's gaze didn't waver. Your job is not your personal playground. You don't get to weaponize authority against a private citizen, and you certainly don't get to involve emergency services for personal grievances. Karen's hands shook as she looked at the empty driveway. For years, she had imagined herself powerful, in control, the one who enforced the neighborhood rules. Now, every lie, every overreach, every inflated complaint was laid bare, witnessed by officers, neighbors, and the record itself. I stepped closer, keeping my tone calm, letting each word land. This wasn't about the driveway. This was about your need to control. And now, everyone can see it. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She searched for allies, but the board members who had followed her lead were nowhere to be found. They avoided her eyes. Some whispered apologies. Some just shook their heads. Her gaze shifted to the sheriff. You can't do this. This isn't legal. Everything here is perfectly legal, the sheriff replied. What isn't legal is what you've been doing. Issuing false citations, filing false reports, obstructing a private citizen. The records speak for themselves. Karen's face went pale. For the first time, she realized the scale of her miscalculation. She had believed that HOA authority was absolute, that no one would challenge her misuse of power. She had believed that calling 911 over a driveway dispute was harmless. She was wrong. The sergeant handed me a copy of the documented reports. Everything is on record. Your driveway, your property, your vehicle, fully protected under county law. Karen's hands trembled as she took a step back. She tried to argue again, but no words came. Her authority had been dismantled, and she knew it. I finally spoke to the gathered neighbors. This wasn't just about me or my driveway. It's about accountability. No one, not even an HOA board member, is above the law. The crowd murmured in agreement. Phones recorded, whispers exchanged. Karen's reputation, once fortified by intimidation, was now fully exposed. The sheriff stepped forward. "Ma'am, any further attempt to interfere, harass, or issue unauthorized citations will be treated as formal violations. This is your official notice." Karen's lips quivered. You can't." "You did," I said softly, letting it sink in. "You made the call, you misused authority, and now it's documented. There's no undoing it." Karen looked around, realizing that every neighbor who had watched her attempts to dominate the street now understood the truth. Her misuse of power had been witnessed and recorded. Her influence was gone. The sheriff nodded to the sergeant. Documented. Escalated. County council notified. Karen finally dropped her eyes to the ground. For years, she had wielded HOA authority like a weapon, believing she was untouchable. Now, every false claim, every intimidation tactic, every misuse of emergency resources had been turned into evidence. She tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The street was clear, the neighbors watching, the record complete. I stepped back, arms crossed. The driveway was mine, my vehicle untouched, my property fully protected, and Karen's illusion of control had vanished entirely. She whispered, barely audible, I didn't think." "You acted without authority," the sheriff replied, "and now it's on record. That's all there is." Karen's shoulders slumped. For the first time, she realized that her obsession with control had led her to this humbling, irreversible moment. The cones, the citations, the phone calls, all meaningless now. And as she walked away slowly, she knew something she hadn't known before. The call she made to assert control had become the record that ensured she could never use that power again. The driveway remained exactly as it had always been. The HOA had been humbled, and Karen had learned the hardest lesson of all. Power is temporary when it isn't grounded in law. The sheriff turned to me, nodding slightly. "Situation contained?" "Yes," I said, "for now." And with that, the neighborhood settled into quiet once more. Karen's reign of intimidation was over, and the record of her overreach would follow her for a long time. Some lessons are painful, some irreversible. This one was both.